All right. Once again, good morning, everybody. I'm Robert Nelson. I'm the program manager for Pivotal New Mexico. Welcome to Impact and Coffee. Today is October 13th. I'm joined by a wonderful panel today. And just to throw it off to my wonderful co-host, Michael Green. Hi, Michael. How are you doing this morning?
Hey, everyone. I'm well. Thank you, Robert. Thank you all for joining us today. Hopefully we get some more people trickle in here in the next couple of minutes. But it's another wonderful Tuesday, and I'm excited that I can share it with you all.
Michael, tell us a little bit about Impact and Coffee this morning.
So Impact and Coffee is a friendly, welcoming conversation where we bring people from the nonprofit community together to share experiences, to share some of the challenges they're having, and to kind of creatively brainstorm solutions and make connections. So it's a wonderful way that we can kind of get the nonprofit community together to kind of, just share our experiences.
And it is also Gratitude Tuesday. Is there anything you want to share that you're grateful for, Michael?
Sure. I am just thankful that all of our panelists are able to join us today. I think this is an important topic that needs to be discussed and we need to hear about. And so it's great to have our panel present. What about you, Robert? What are you thankful for?
I am grateful that it is fall finally, and we have colder temperatures, which is kind of going crazy. But I like I definitely like the colder weather a lot more, so I'm grateful for that. For our audience members, if there's anything that you feel that you're grateful for, please share it in the chat for Gratitude Tuesday. We'd love to hear from you. And with that, we'll get started. I know we have one more person. One of our panelists is running late, and that's cool. But our first panelist is here, Charlene Bencomo. How are you this morning, Charlene? Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization, please?
Sure, I'm doing well. Thank you all so much for having me this morning. I am feeling really grateful for coffee as we start. Yes, my name is Charlene Bencomo, and I'm the executive director of Bold Futures. We were formerly Young Women United, so many folks know us by that name. We are in our 22nd year of existence, which is really shocking. We're really proud to have built our organization in Albuquerque for the most part, but over the last 4 years or so, we have also been in southern New Mexico in the Las Cruces office, which is where I work out of. So we are a reproductive justice organization that focuses on making sure that women, girls, people of color have access to the information and resources that they need to be able to make real decisions about their own bodies and lives.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. We were just waiting for Sunshine Muse. When she gets here, we'll just ask her to introduce herself. But for now, the spotlight is on you, Charlene. Quite all right. I'm just going to own it. That's all I got to say. So we're going to jump into our first question. The pandemic has exposed so much inequity in our communities. How have you seen this playing out in terms of its impact on women in particular? And how is your organization addressing this?
First, I think you said something really interesting, that the pandemic has exposed a lot of this inequity. And for myself and our organization, and I know also Sunshine's organization, we've known this for decades. We've been working on these inequities for decades. And so that, yes, the light is shining and things have been exacerbated, certainly, but we know that these things have been there for a very long time. When we look particularly at women, one of the things that comes up for me that has been really impacted are women and people who are pregnant and going in to have their babies. Things have changed so drastically because of protocols and safety, and we get that things certainly cannot just be business as usual. Absolutely, people need to be safe. But there have also been some really horrific things that have happened under the guise of COVID safety. One of the stories you all may have heard is out of the Loveless Hospital in Albuquerque, where women were being separated from their babies based on the fact that they looked Native, based on their zip code. And this is obviously something that is, and it was a secret policy that folks knew about, but it wasn't written anywhere. And there was a whistleblower, someone came forward and said, this just isn't right. And and we're seeing a lot of the folks that we work with, doulas, midwives, and I'm sure Sunshine can speak to this as well, but having difficulty getting access to the hospital, having difficulty understanding what PPE they should have when they get there. People are just not communicating in ways that are helpful for the birthing person or their families. And, that's just general, but specifically talking about how, yes, women are being impacted, but then when you break that down even deeper to women of color, Black women, Indigenous women who have already terrible birthing outcomes in this country, it has just made that so much worse. So in response to hearing about this, we had already as an organization been talking about what we could do to help with the birthing community and help with families that were going in to have their babies, or that maybe were having babies at home and needed to be transferred to a facility. And then this happened, and we quickly gathered the troops, gathered our partners, folks we had worked with for many years, and also some new people who are in the birthing world. We feel really lucky to be able to pull in not just folks from Albuquerque, but also people from southern New Mexico and the borderland, because in Las Cruces, things are very different. The big city is El Paso, so that's much closer than Albuquerque for many of us. So we're feeling really lucky to pull in some of the birth workers from El Paso as well, because they are part of our network down south. And we are just talking about ways that we can be culturally conscious and impact the medical advisory team or committee made some recommendations for hospitals, birthing facilities that are just not culturally conscious, that are not considering the actual needs of our communities, that are not considering what it's like to be going into that situation. And it feels very like it's coming from a liability standpoint, which I also understand. But when you are a birthing person, that's not the first thing on your mind. So there are a lot of things to consider, and using COVID safety as a justification for some of these really terrible policies just felt like somewhere we could step in. So that's one of the things that comes up for me when you're talking about how it's impacted women.
And Charlene, I really appreciate that. I'm going to kick it over to Michael to ask our next question.
Yeah, thank you, Charlene, for that first question. So what we're going to talk about now is a little bit of mental health. So yeah, with the COVID times, I mean, everybody's been experiencing different things. So either personally or through some of your clients or others that you work with, can you tell us about the impact that COVID has had on mental health?
Yeah, so we're not a direct service organization, so we don't have clients per se, but we do a lot of community-based organizing and have leaders across the state that we engage with around various issues, particularly when it comes to LGBTQ communities, people of color, Black and Indigenous issues, birthing issues, people who have been formerly incarcerated or have experience with substance use and parenting or pregnancy. So a lot of communities that we engage with are already oppressed and marginalized under normal circumstances. And as we were discussing a little bit earlier, this has just made it even more so. So I think mental health has certainly been a factor for a lot of people. Personally, I know it has been really hard to deal with virtual learning for kiddos at home, because that just adds a whole other layer to being at home and trying to get work done. It feels really stressful to be trying to get work done and feel like there are these really huge things that our communities need and that we want to make sure happen. While also making sure that the 97th snack of the morning is being given out of the cupboard, and that my daughter's on her Zooms, and that our son's getting his work done. And it just feels so heavy. And sometimes it can certainly feel like you're just not succeeding at any of the things you're trying to do as a mom, as a teacher, as a part of an organization who's trying to get work done. So personally, that's been my own struggle. And I know it's like that for a lot of our staff as well, who are maybe not just caring for children, but also elders or other family members that they're now feeling a little bit more responsible for. And our leaders, like I was talking about earlier, have really reached out and just said they they feel isolated, they feel alone, they don't really know how to access community sometimes. When does it feel safe to access community? When is it not enough to just be on a Zoom or a virtual call? So we've tried to build in some different opportunities for folks to reconnect. We've definitely tried to make a conscious effort to talk about mental health and to let people know that it's okay to step away. And not only is it okay, but you need to set up your own systems to be able to step away from the hard things, whether it be social media or the news, or work, whatever it is. Family, it might not be that easy to step away from, but certainly address that and make sure that you are conscious of when things feel like they're too much.
Definitely, thank you. I think, a lot of the challenges that you addressed are very relatable to everyone. So I think that's kind of a global thing. And also, I agree with what you said about it's very important that we let people know that, taking care of your mental health is okay. Because I think a lot of times for so long we kind of pushed mental health to the side. And so it is important that we kind of readdress that topic and say, hey, you know what, it's okay. Cool, so thank you for that. So our second panelist joined the room. Sunshine, welcome. I'm glad you were able to make it today. If you could please introduce yourself and talk about the organization that you work with, or maybe 3 or 4 minutes, that would be great. We would love to hear about you and what y'all are doing.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for welcoming me. And thank you to everyone who took the time to be with us this morning. And hi, Charlene. It's nice to see you. I love that. And sorry, my lighting isn't perfect. So my name is Sunshine Muse. I run a nonprofit in New Mexico called Black Health New Mexico. And we try to address the most egregious health disparity areas that disproportionately impact Black people in New Mexico. And typically those numbers mirror national trends. So one of our focus areas is birth equity, because in New Mexico, maternal mortality in the Black community is the second highest per capita rate in New Mexico, even though we're only 3% of the population. We follow Indigenous women in maternal mortality rates, and I think Indigenous people are about 12 to 13% of the population. So you have these small populations in the state that are disproportionately impacted. Black women also have high rates of infant mortality and preterm birth in New Mexico. We have the first highest rate of maternal mortality in the country, second highest rate of diabetes in New Mexico, second to Indigenous people. So again, small populations that are really disproportionately impacted by health disparities. And I think we're going to get to talk about some of what we do, but right now we have our Birth Equity Collaborative, which I'd love to talk more about, sort of woven into the answers to the questions. We have an online learning series that we stream through Facebook Live, where we've actually been addressing mental health. So whenever that question comes around to me, I want to share a little bit about that. And we have a recently started Farm to Table program that is serving 60 Black households between Santa Fe and Albuquerque, and getting them farm fresh, nutritional food coming directly from northern New Mexico farmers. And the farmers that we focus on buying from are family farms, women-owned or worked farms, and people of color-owned farms. So we're into nutrition and all the health disparity areas that disproportionately impact Black people in the state and usually in the country.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction, and statistics that you gave are wild to hear, and it's so unfortunate, and it's amazing that there's organizations like yours who are trying to do things about that. So we definitely appreciate that. I'm going to toss it over to Robert, who is going to ask some questions.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go back a little bit. So, Sunshine, if you could just, I know you want to answer some questions about how the crisis have impacted your organization, but could you talk a little bit about how the crisis is playing out in terms of its impact on women in particular? How is your organization addressing that impact?
Hey, Robert. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Thank you. So our organization centers the lived experience and expertise of those most impacted. And since we're a Black-led org and a Black woman-led org, that means Black women. When the pandemic first started, we thought, what are we going to do? Like, how are we going to address this? All of the organizing and educating that we had been doing and advocating had all been in person. And so we quickly realized that we had to pivot to an online platform, and we launched an online learning series that started, I think, like the first week in May, maybe May 3rd or something. And between May 3rd and the end of June, we ran 60 online 60 days. We did 30 webinars in 60 days, and all of them featured Black female presenters and experts who had professional and lived experience around the issues that we covered. One of the things that we did right away is that we realized we had to start talking about mental health, like immediately. To Charlene's point, everybody was living it, right? It didn't matter if you had kids or didn't have kids, whether you could work remotely or you were deemed essential, which I think is like an unbelievable insult in terms of how essential workers have been treated. But whatever the case may be, we knew that we needed to center the voices of Black women. And so we started something called Mental Health Mondays. And every Monday we ran an hour-long webinar that featured a Black female mental health expert talking about, like, what's it like? What's it like now that COVID has shut down? What's it like now that the kids are home? What's it like now that the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor murders have occurred and we're seeking justice? What's it feel like to see all this protest in the street? How do we survive this anxiety and this moment of opportunity in a way that's really meaningful and that allows us to care for ourselves and each other? So that series also covered things like gestational diabetes, home birth as an option in COVID. If you're gonna have a hospital birth, how do you prepare for that during the time of COVID? And these are just a couple more examples in addition to the mental health. And again, all of the presenters were professional Black women. I hope that answers it.
It does, and then some. Thank you so much for that. Next question I'll ask is, so what can folks be doing for each other during a crisis that can help promote good physical and mental health? And do you see opportunities in the community or within your organization for individuals to engage? This kind of goes a little bit to what you were answering just a minute ago, Sunshine. I'll kick it over to you first, and then toss it over to Charlene.
So embarrassed because every time I mute out, I'm like trying to eat my breakfast muffin.
That's good to know.
But this is such an incredible forum that allows for humanity. And I'd say more and more, I'm gonna mute while I chew. More and more, like, this is becoming the norm. And it's the norm that I think many of us really wanted. We wanted to be able to arrive as our whole selves, as our fragile selves, and as our hungry selves, as our parent selves, right? As our tired selves, as our I don't have time to put on makeup this morning self. So this is one upside of what the pandemic has given us. And I think it's interesting because Charlene was talking about community, and it's like community is where we are allowed to be whole and vulnerable, and where we don't have to constantly wear a mask, even as professionals. So I say all that while I finish chewing, and then I say, what was the question?
I love talking about bringing our pulse out. That's so amazing. Thank you so much. The questions again, and to laugh too. I think laughing in the pandemic is.
We're desperate. We need it. Mm-hmm.
So what can folks be doing for each other during the crisis that can help promote good physical and mental health? And do you see opportunities in the community or within your organization for individuals to engage?
Yeah, so I like what can folks be doing. So I think it's really important to stay connected. There's been a lot of conversation around, are we socially distancing? I started saying strategically distancing. I know other people say physically distancing, right? So writing our own narrative around how we're navigating this pandemic instead of having it written for us. People of color in particular, and I think all people, are like social, right? But I was reading an article last night that was talking about depression in Black men during the pandemic. And it was saying one of the really hard things for Black men is that, there's this whole thing about like barbershop culture, or, let's call it basketball, support culture, and there's just no opportunity for people to get together and bond anymore. So I think we have to find ways to do that are strategically distanced and allow ourselves to write our narrative around how we're going to navigate this pandemic. There are ways for people to engage. We're actually just starting a volunteer program with the organization. We found during the sort of blooming of the Black Lives Matter movement this summer that more and more people were reaching out to us wanting to be involved. And we welcome that. We need help with our food program, getting the food to the families that have signed up. We need help instituting anti-racism and equity conversations in the larger community, sort of like in a circle format, and we can help people figure out how to do that. So if you visit our website, and I didn't mean to be a plug, but we have a volunteer link on it now, and we're blackhealthnewmexico.com. I hope that helps.
It totally helps. You remind me of how much I miss eating with my community, within the Asian Pacific Islander community. And so whenever we get together, whether it's a community meeting or even just potluck, it's so nice to just be able to eat our food from our home countries and do that with other folks as much as possible. So thank you for that. Toss it over to you, Charlene. How could you weigh in a little bit on this question or these questions?
Sure. I love Sunshine. It's so good to see your face, and I am so glad you're here this morning. And I appreciate you just bringing the realness with the muffin, because I think that's it right there. Being able to be here as your real self, with your kids in the background, with your dogs and cats climbing on the tables. All of that is it's sort of brought down that barrier of trying to hold it together. Sometimes you just can't even fake it when the chaos is behind you. So it's like, you know what? Yeah, this is my life. This is what's happening right now. So I definitely agree to that humanity piece for sure. And just, I think, giving yourself and each other a little bit of grace in this moment to just maybe not be on your best day sometimes, maybe be dealing with a lot that folks aren't seeing. And we should have been doing this the whole time, but this has certainly been a reminder for folks to do that. I think particularly for women of color right now, just giving yourself a little bit of grace. I know it feels difficult. Like you're not allowed to fail. You can't fail even a little, because then it will be multiplied 5 billion times. And in this moment right now, I think that resilience, that ability to show up in your real self is what we all just need to see. We don't need the airbrushed version anymore. We just need to see what's really going on so that we can give each other a little bit of that grace. I love the opportunities that, like this farm to table program, getting food to folks. Not only is that making sure that people have real healthy foods to eat that are coming from a local spot that has been so thoughtfully resourced and sought out for being female, people of color, worked and owned, all of that, but it allows people to be in that volunteer movement. What can you do for your community to just boost your own spirits? Like selfishly, how can I make folks feel better by making myself feel better? But it serves a greater purpose. I think those are the opportunities that I'm seeing more folks start to reach out for down in southern New Mexico as well. I know that I myself love to cook and share meals with folks because that just feels so good to me. So I think things like that. I love strategically distant. That's brilliant because yes, I think I have my little bubble of folks that we know feel safe and feel like community and feel like family. And that's where we're finding that sort of regeneration and healing. I know as an organization, we've also tried to really provide some healing spaces for different groups of our leaders where virtually they can join traditional healers and just be in community and just talk about what's happening in their lives. I know we've hosted an allyship watch series where people can comment and participate online as well. But I think it's so critical that we find that humanity, whatever was missing before, and definitely use this as an opportunity to just be yourself, be your whole self. It's very hard to do sometimes, especially when things feel messy, but I think that's it right there. So
That's awesome, Charlene. Thank you so much. I'm just going to throw an audible a little bit for both of you. Could you talk a little bit more about like what a healing space could look like for your communities, your organizations? I think we'd love to hear more about that. And if it's okay, Charlene, I would, just to tag on to what you were saying, could I start with you?
Sure. So one of the things that we noticed we had the Allyship Watch series going on, and it was particularly about trans people of color in our communities and how we can support them. And it was on Facebook Live. And then we had a couple of leaders from Bold Futures who we've been organizing with for a while now that are Black, that were just commenting on how they felt so isolated and didn't have anyone to talk to, particularly down here in southern New Mexico in Las Cruces area. And so as a result, we sort of said, well, what do you need? Do you need a space to connect? And we provided a space for folks to connect online. And at first it was just one session where people could just talk about whatever they needed to talk about. And then some of the folks requested an additional meeting. And so we brought in a traditional healer and sent some little care packages with crystals and agua florida and some other things, cleansing materials. And there were 2 healing sessions. And then another one of the leaders said, hey, I've been really wanting to read this book called Joy and Rage. And it's about Black healing through rage and also finding joy, because there's this spectrum, right? It's complex and we need to recognize that. So now they're having a book club. The really interesting part of this, and I talked a little bit at the beginning about this with Sunshine when it was only supposed to be one conversation, but none of our staff right now are Black. And at first it was kind of a conversation like, well, who's going to join in? And of course, no one's going to join in. That's not our lane. That's not our place. Our place right now is to resource people's time, provide them the space to build the community that they need, and trust that they are their own medicine. And what was supposed to be one meeting has turned into, I think, 9 now. And we've brought in a facilitator, and it's been going really well. But I think it was a learning experience for us too, to figure out it's not always our place to be in the mix. But if we can resource and we can provide space, then that is where we need to step in as allies, as partners. It's been a really good learning experience for us. And we hope to do more learning around that. We've gotten some really good feedback, and I feel really proud that we have been able to provide that space.
That is so amazing. Thank you so much for that. Sunshine, what about you? What are healing spaces looking like for y'all in your organization, in your community spaces?
Yeah, so I'd say sort of like gathering our own. I know that in the equity world and work, it's called, affinity groups. So when we're able to sit with folks who look like us and who have similar experiences to us, and we know there's a diversity of experience, even if we're the same, gender identity or skin color, right? But finding our commonality alone together has been really meaningful for people. I'd say another healing space that I see is just like this raw realness around when we meet. So what I have found over the last several months is that in my meetings, the check-ins take up half the meetings because people are really traumatized. They're really lonely. They're really stressed and managing things that they haven't before. And they are longing to be in Zoom settings where wholeness is valued over productivity, right? Because being whole is actually like a form of productivity. Again, if we're writing our own narrative. So even in my one-on-one meetings, which are rare, most of my meetings now are sort of group format, but even in the one-on-ones, if it's an hour long, the first 30 minutes, it's people just talking about like, how are you feeling? How are you coping? What's going on with you? How is your family? And people really need that. So we're creating healing spaces by sort of dropping the dogmatic and didactic style of meeting that we have all been accustomed to before now. And then lastly, really our online learning series, 30 sessions in 60 days, we covered breath, we covered yoga, we covered mindfulness, we covered mental health every Monday for 2 months. We covered equity and birth equity and what would that really look like. We looked at Black and Indigenous solidarity and what like courageous thing could that look like? So we covered spiritual poverty and sort of sound healing with a woman out of North Carolina, a Black woman who plays sound healing bowls. And then we just came back online with that series because I took part of the summer off to sort of just like recoup and get the Farm to Table project started. But we just came back online on Tuesday, and it'll be every Tuesday right now from noon to 1 Mountain. And so last Tuesday we are opening or reopening was Black Joy with a therapist out of LA. And today we're having 2 therapists who are also yoginis, yoga practitioners, who are coming to talk to us about body sovereignty. So what does it mean to have body sovereignty when you're a Black woman in a racist and patriarchal culture? All those are healing spaces for us.
Also very liberating too. Imagine it's just so cool to like hear about some of that really great stuff going on. Thank you both for answering that, like just that new question. I'm going to kick it over to Michael to ask our next question.
Cool, thank you all. So this next question is going to kind of focus a little more on some of the details of how COVID has impacted you. So how has your organization been impacted by the crisis, and how has your budget and revenue been impacted? Have you seen an increased number of clients or difficulties engaging people? So what all have you seen impact your organizations during this time? And we'll go ahead and start with Charlene.
I think yes, our organization has absolutely been impacted. We immediately had to go to all virtual organizing. We all went to working from home, remote work, and that was it took a little bit to get sort of to where it felt like we were acclimated to start moving forward, because for a while it felt like a scramble. But once we did and we started thinking about what does this look like? What does access look like for our people, for our leaders? There's a lot. We were on Zoom. We had to purchase additional licenses and equipment for folks that were now at their houses. And then we deal with the real thing in New Mexico. A lot of our state is very rural, and folks don't have reliable internet access. Depending on who's on Zoom in my house or what's happening in the neighborhood here, I may not have reliable internet. I may not be able to be on video. We have a lot of our leaders who may not even know what Zoom is, how to get on there. They only have their phone. So we're having to find out what is the best way to get our message across. For some folks, it has been Zoom, but for a lot of people, it might be social media, or it might be just send me a text message to let me know what's going on, because I want to be involved, but this is the way that I can be involved. So I think just being really cognizant of what people's access is to technology, and if they want to be better, have better service, what can they do? How can they get those resources? Some companies, because of school going virtual, have offered discount services or things like that. So just making sure people have that kind of information. And as far as budget and things like that, yes, certainly we've definitely lost some funders, which, for a small organization is always a hit, no matter what, if you feel it. But we've also had some longtime partners really step up and send emergency funding without us even having to apply for it. They just said, look, we know things are crazy right now and we're sending you money. We trust you to do what is needed because you are on the ground, you see the community need, and you're going to get the money where it needs to be. So we've been so grateful for that, for those long-term partnerships that have resulted in this trust that has allowed for some additional funding to be sent our way. But I think there are so many ways our org has been impacted. And there are new ways every day. The longer this goes, it feels like, every Monday is like, what's gonna try to be our demise this week? We have to figure out how to be flexible and how to get around it.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, one of the conversations that we've had in our organization is about, the rainy day fund. Oh, we can't do this because we need to put money in the rainy day fund. But you know what? This is the rainy day. This is what we have kind of been like saving for, preparing for. So yeah, I've definitely seen that come out. So thank you, Charlene. And Sunshine, same questions to you.
Yeah, it is the rainy day. I completely agree with that. So thank you for that quote and sentiment. We had to pivot also, like everyone, to an online platform. I'm sort of a recluse, so I don't do social media personally. We just started our Facebook page last February because we had some legislation going around Black maternal health, and thought, how can we get beyond sort of our organizational mailing list? And so we started that Facebook page in February, and by the end of the legislative session had about maybe 200 followers. And we decided, like, how are we going to get our online learning series to people? We can't expect everyone to sign up for Zoom, to Charlene's point. And so we said, let's do a Facebook Live. Never had done that before. So we started doing these Facebook Lives, and we're up to a little over 600 followers now. And that's really just since COVID hit because of the work that we've been doing. So branching into new mediums of communication has been a big shift and a change for us. We also weren't into food. Like, that's a big charge. Really, I'm actually just coming back from picking up food from the farm. That's why I'm late to this call. So it's major, you know what I mean, to coordinate. And but it seemed really necessary, and not just in terms of food security and economic challenges that people were facing and households were facing, but also in terms of community building, right? So to Robert's point, like in the Black culture and most cultures, food means something. And so being able to bring people ancestral food, because our people used to work the land, right? That's what slavery was, in part at least, and in large part. And so we know, like, what fresh food is and what fresh vegetables are. And when you can hand an elderly Black person like a bunch of turnips or collard greens or okra or tomatoes, it means more to them than just their palate. It means something from the heart and something from our intergenerational culture. So we wanted to do the food program again to help build community in a time when people were feeling very scared and isolated, and to you guys' point, when mental health has been challenged. As far as funding, it's been interesting because we've actually been able to diversify our funding because we've just pivoted so quickly to be willing to serve our community in new ways. It's so much so that it was like, no, we can't do everything, right? But like, what can we do that goes around with our already established values? So food is an already established value of the nonprofit because we deal with health disparities, and some health disparities can be mitigated, prevented, and at times even reversed through like good, solid nutrition. So that was in line with what we were up to. To Charlene's point, we found that some funders were super understanding, and they already had a framework wherein they were ready. They were just like on the cusp of being willing to start trusting communities to determine how to use our funding in a way that really made sense for our people. I was reading something recently, I just want to pull it up because I took a couple notes last night, but essentially it was talking about like funding as, it was such an interesting term. It says the philanthropic belief that most marginalized communities lack the knowledge and will to address social and health inequities creates something called philanthropic redlining. I want to post that article in the chat because what a concept, right? Like philanthropic redlining. But we found that many funders wanted to get past that. And I don't know if it's because who the program officers are, who the leadership is, or because they had been doing equity work for years already. But this moment between COVID and Black Lives Matter blooming this summer made them say, we trust you, take it, help your community. So that's been a really positive experience for us. Now, indeed, there are some funders who still don't value Black people, Black women, or women of color-led organizations. And it's really tragic. They underfund, and they expect us to do the heavy lifting around eradicating equity and racism rather, and creating equity. So that's like an oxymoron, how you can underfund, but then say, do the most work. There are funders who don't value Blacks in New Mexico because we're such a small part of the population. So they look at us like we're ridiculous for coming and saying we want to do something like a food program. Like, well, who would sign up? Who would you serve? Why is this important? We need to deal with the populations that have larger percentages in the state. But I think those are sort of remnants of white supremacy. I don't have a way to say it gentler. And I really hope that it goes away with 2020.
You did mention some tragic things, but one of the things that I really appreciated that you mentioned is how you guys kind of diversified during this time and doing the whole food support and everything. So it's nice to be innovative on ways that you can better connect with your clients and everything. So we definitely appreciate that. And yeah, definitely feel free to post any of the articles or anything you want in the chat because it does sound like that is kind of beneficial to this entire group. So. Now I'm going to shoot it over to Robert, who's going to ask the next question.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks, Sunshine. I know, I hear all the things you're talking about because I know, it's still a pretty small percentage in terms of how much philanthropy funds communities of color, especially Black communities, and it's less than a percentage point across philanthropy as a whole in this country, especially. So there were $800 billion in philanthropic dollars, like in 2018. Just a shade over or something like that, and only 1% for communities of color, 1%. So less than 1% for Black communities, less than 1% for brown communities, less than 1% or nothing for LGBTQ plus communities, less than 1% for women, period. And it's just, that's something that needs to be fixed like yesterday. But it is the remnants of white supremacy, or it is white supremacy. It's not remnants, it's still there. So, I'm going to ask the last question because we're going to try something new today. We wanted to get back to networking with our audience a little bit more. So we're going to try to take some time at the end here to get everybody in breakout rooms and talk a little bit about today's session and how can people be more involved. So I want to ask this kind of compound question just to allow folks to brag a little bit about some of the successful things that are working in your organizations and your communities. And then just to wrap up, what can we do? What can our community do for y'all today? And then we'll go into breakout rooms. And I'll kick it to Charlene just to start us off, and I'll go to you, Sunshine, here in just a moment.
So first question was, what have we done that's been successful?
Yes.
Okay. I think it seems counterintuitive to talk about this as being successful or something that we're proud of, but we have really stepped back a little bit and started to look at our own organization and our own practices and how many of our tendencies were tied to white supremacy and how many of those our practices were rooted in this idea that productivity is the goal. And it's been hard to dismantle that even within our own organization. I think it's when it feels like there's so much work to do, when it feels like your self-worth is tied to your productivity and to your 60-hour-a-week work week, or to all of these things that we get in our heads that mean success, it's hard to be a whole person. And we've really started talking about that and talking about ways that we can change that. And one of the things that we did, I think it started in August or maybe July, we had a couple of staff members request separately to different supervisors to take Fridays off for a while. And that really made me think about, if 2 staff members separately are requesting this, and we only had 10 staff members at the time, that's significant. So how many other people need that space? So we had, I think, 10 weeks of Fridays off. And what I noticed was people were still working a few hours on Fridays, but it was much more casual. It was like time to catch up. It was time to just, I might check an email here or there. And then people did take advantage of just having some time with their family that didn't feel like they were balancing 20 million things. And I think we're really just starting to dig in and reset some of those old mindsets, some of the ways things have always been done, and challenging that, and living in our values, living in the values that we say we have. And it's tough. And I think that is one of the things that I'm most proud of right now, and a success that I feel like will definitely have longevity, because we're committed to it, and it's harder to do the internal work sometimes than it is to go out in community and do these big things that result in policy change and all the great things that we are still doing. We're also doing the hard work of changing what isn't working for us on the inside.
What are some things we can do for you today, Charlene?
Oh, things you can do for us. Let's see. We always love grassroots donations because then, they don't have all the restrictions, the fund restrictions of funders. And it means that the community appreciates what we're doing and they see the work that we're putting out there that we are really hoping has an effect on people's daily lives, particularly for LGBTQ communities, particularly for Black, Indigenous, Latino people, people of color. You can always go to our website, Bold Futures. There's a donation page there. Tomorrow, we have a free convening online that is about religious refusals and how that is impacting our LGBTQ communities. There's a specific panel led by some of our Indigenous partners talking about the Hyde Amendment and how that is a federal religious refusal. There's a drag queen story time at the end of the day. That's going to be fabulous. There's a book being read in Spanish, a book being read in English by 2 different drag queens that we're so proud of. Just highlighting diverse families and what it means to be your whole self and be proud of that. So you can look on our website to register. It's totally free. There's different sessions throughout the day, so no pressure to join every single session. And it will be recorded, so if you want to join, from your cozy bed later when you can do that as well.
That's awesome. Thanks, Charlene. Sunshine, could you talk a little bit about anything you want to brag about, and then what can we do? What can our community do for y'all today?
Wow. I feel like I've bragged enough, to be honest. So I'm just going to go with that. And we'd love you to get involved, get to know what we're about. Visit our Facebook page. You can link to it directly through our website. Take a look at some of our past online learning series event. We did an incredible one called A Courageous Conversation on Birth Equity in New Mexico. You can find that on our website on the New Mexico Birth Equity Collaborative page of the website. That's all the information on the work we've been doing since 2014 to increase birth equity in New Mexico. And that conversation was our first solidarity effort between Black and Indigenous women and immigrant women talking about birth equity in New Mexico. Super powerful, super raw, super whole. Yes, we also appreciate donations. Our donations went up dramatically since COVID started and since the Black Lives Matter movement bloomed nationally and internationally. So we are incredibly grateful for that. And right now, what we're really looking for is more people to get involved in our birth equity work or get involved in our Farm to Table project. Just get in where you can fit in. So there's a volunteer form now on our website. We have a new volunteer coordinator who's going to be sort of pulling folks together and helping them plug in ways that are meaningful. I really think if you want to start doing equity work and anti-racism work in your own org or your own community, this is a great time to come to us and say you want to do that and allow us to support you in that type of effort. What does it really look like to center the communities that are most impacted? We'd love more people to dive into what that looks like and take some risks in their own homes, orgs, and communities about making that happen. Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both so much. Really, this was a tremendous conversation. I really appreciated everything you brought today, and then some, and for all that you do in our communities. Could we have a big, huge virtual round of applause for Sunshine and Charlene, please? Folks are press the emoji or the reaction buttons in the chat. And also, so we're going to try something new. And I know this is, for Impacting Coffee, we tend to just do these things where it's like, we're just going to jump in. It's going to be cool. So what we're going to do is we're going to do some networking. And some of the prompts that we're asking folks to network, you can reflect on some of the things we're talked about today, or you can talk a little bit about your organization and some of the work you're doing. We can save this space we can save these breakout rooms for community announcements. So if you have things you want to share in your community, please save that for either the chat or for the breakout room specifically. So we're going to break out into 4 rooms. There are about 18 people here. That means at least 4 people per room. So we're going to do this randomly. We're going to ask the folks, when you introduce yourselves, do that one at a time. And the 2 prompts we're asking folks to talk about anything you want to reflect on with the speakers and the panelists today, they will both be in a room of their own separately. So you might get Sunshine, you might get Charlene, woo, or talk about any community announcements that are happening in your organization. And just to note too, if you have any community announcements, you can use our Facebook group, ABQ Impactors. We'll put that in the chat when we come back. And we're going to put people in breakout rooms right now. So we're going to try this. This is going to be interesting. Okay. And for those of you on Facebook Live, we're going to close out Facebook Live. But I will say this, welcome back to Impact and Coffee for those of you who haven't joined us before or haven't joined us in a long time. Thanks so much for joining us this morning and for coming to this chat. It's been really cool just to hang out with a lot of folks. If you are coming to Impact and Coffee next week, we have a very special Impact and Coffee to get out the vote and go to the polls. We're going to have a special set of lots of speakers, actually about 9 to 10 speakers talking on a variety of different topics as to why you should vote in the election on the first Tuesday in November. And then we'll have a keynote speaker to round us out for that day. So join us at 9 a.m. on Tuesday of next week, and we'll have this very special Impact and Coffee. But until then, we will see you next week, and may all your lights be green.